I'm April Durham, and the show that I proposed for this Armory exhibition is called Techno Eyes Still Gleaming, and it comes after a show called Techno Eyes Gleaming with the light from 1,000 fluorescent bulbs. That was the original show. I was an MFA student at Art Center, and John was an advisor. John O'Brien was an advisor, and we had a lot of time talking about metaphysics and art and all the branches thereof. And he asked me after I had graduated, he asked me if I would be interested in putting together a sort of project-oriented show for the brewery projects, which wouldn't be about exhibiting art objects in a gallery atmosphere, but would be about really experimenting with ideas and so on, that's a big part of my practice. So I invited several different people that I knew from Art Center and other places, other venues or other schools to participate in a show that would be considering the contemporary sublime, but not necessarily coming up with a definitive answer or definition to that term. And the experiment was to see if we could sort of engage with this idea of the sublime, the contemporary sublime, without naming it as such and without clearly defining it or being definitive about what it might be. And the interest sort of began with some of our professors like Dave Hickey or Jeremy Gilbert Rolfe, who were writing books about beauty and the sublime that had been published in the early 2000s. I felt like there could be more said about those things from these young artists, young meaning not necessarily in age, but in their practice. And so we were looking at questions of time and questions of simultaneity and questions of identity and questions of spatiality and trying to evoke this kind of other space and other rendering of time, and even questions of what beauty might be in terms of those at that context. Techno Eyes Still Gleaming, which is part 2 of the original Techno Eyes with the long title, is an extension of that question of considering the sublime with the addition of a sort of consideration of the way that we build belief. And specifically, I wanted to go sort of the whole gamut. So there's someone who works with the body and with body parts, Pam Struger. And Pam is, she writes, she's a performance artist, she does installation work, she builds sculptures. She's very much about experimenting with materials and color and through the viscera of the body in a way. And it becomes so transformed by her process that it definitely takes you through on a journey through it, but it becomes so much more than that. And then Will Fowler is a painter that, he was in the original show, and he's someone I really admire his work. He deals with anthropology and a sort of abstracted narrative in the way he builds up the surface of the paintings, the whole idea of his paintings. He uses lots of symbolism that gets very abstracted. So they could be considered simple, abstract works, but there's so much more about sort of mapping and layering and narrative and investigation and all of that built into the painting. So they're really complex. Linda Parnell is a sculptor who recently began working with DNA in her work. She always was a really formal sculptor and very interested in science, physics, and aesthetics, sort of conjoining the two. But this DNA work, I think, is quite curious because she's being a little bit more direct with the science, and it's definitely about looking at immortality and our drive for immortality, whether or not it's capable, sustainable, etc., and then aestheticizing that in these sculptures, which sometimes are. And she's someone who, everything is very beautiful that she makes, but she definitely wants to kind of go at beauty through the back door of grotesquerie. Jill Poirot is another painter, and she works with very banal subject matter, turnips and somebody's feet and, maybe Russian ancestry and so on. But again, she does she engages with it in this kind of biomorphic, evolving way. And then she doesn't just display one panel. She has these sort of arrangements of paintings that, again, build a narrative. And I'm really interested in sort of Victorian taxonomy and, 18th century collections of the scientific inquiry that was not coming from our contemporary notion of science. It was about just getting stuff and having as many examples as possible of, all the hummingbirds in a particular region or all the cardinals that one might shoot and stuff in a particular region. And I'm interested in this question of, other ways that we might do a kind of scientific inquiry through the auspices of insanity or illogicality or unreason. And then the way that we build up meaning out of that. So, I'm interested in semantics and systems of belief and so on. So and I'm a storyteller. So my combination of those two things have been to have these creatures, which are either animals or sometimes letters, tell stories within the framework of the artwork. And so the piece that I have in this show is a bestiary called the Semantic Bestiary, and none of the renditions of the beasts are there. It's just a letter with some information about beasts that is connected to either psychology or mythology or other kinds of, narrative about creatures, and the way that we use that to build up meaning. And then there's a lot of repetition and a lot of sort of decoration like the medieval monks would do. So I would say my own work is, again, about trying to generate a taxonomy that can rise above, its origins, and perhaps, or above is a sketchy word to me, because, that again, I think is an old-fashioned look at transcendence or the sublime, but being able to shift it into another space so that it can evoke something beyond itself. Pam's making an installation piece that should, I think, go all the way down a hall or a sort of walkway. And she's kind of working out. She had the main sculptural part already, and then she wanted to work on something site specific for that space that's about educating, and so on. So it'll involve, changing that space a little bit, and she liked the what do you call that, the sort of cave of the hallway, so she was interested in engaging that. I think that Linda's piece will eventually be an accumulated sculpture. Will and Jill's pieces are painting installation. I think it will be just single paintings, and then Jill's is a painting installation. And my piece is on shipping tags, little, there are hundreds of they're about 2x4 shipping tags that get installed in a kind of grid pattern, so they look like an illuminated manuscript. I really appreciate John O'Brien's willingness to try things and to be about collaboration and experiment and sort of circling the fringes of what's acceptable or what's normal, and just to see what comes up. And I think he's done that so effectively with lots of artists. He's willing to believe in you if you have an idea. And, he works internationally, so that's really wonderful. It gives you the opportunity to meet people from other places, which for me has been a really big deal.